Hello everyone. Today I'm with my sweet mate Mo, and I wanted to have a discussion with her and kind of tell her about the book that we've been reading as a class, same kind of different as me. It's just an amazing true story about a man who's an international art dealer. He's wealthy. He, has everything figured out. He's always had his life kind of set up for him.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a black man named Denver who grew up as a modern day slave in a situation.
Like indentured servitude?
Exactly, yeah. So, but he got out of that and then was homeless for the rest of his life. So we hear a lot about him going to jail through violence and theft, and just so many terrible situations that he's been in.
So very different from Ron.
Exactly, completely different lives, completely different, trajectories of their lives going forward. But Ron's wife, her name is Deborah, and she is just such a graceful woman. She's so loving. She always has God's will and what's God calling her to do at the forefront of her mind, no matter what. And all she knows is to follow.
So it's a book about faith as well.
Yes, so it's all about faith and bringing people together through that.
Got it.
Yeah. So in that, with Deborah, she decides to reach out to the homeless, and she feels like God's calling her to impact the lives of these homeless people. And of course, by this time, Denver is homeless, and he is going to the shelter that her and Ron start to volunteer at.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's how they meet.
Yes, that's how they meet, and she brings them together.
I was just wondering how they foster a friendship when they're so far and two worlds apart, because they're dealing with slavery and homelessness, and then being rich and not ever even considering that was a problem, and just how those themes play out
right
through their friendship.
It takes a lot of time, honestly, and Deborah pushes Ron more and more. I want you to be friends with that man Denver, because it takes them a while to learn his name and figure out who he is, because he's very reserved, quiet. He's kind of violent. People are scared of him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But she knows, she had a vision from God just of him, and God telling her that man Denver is going to change things for everyone. And so she's pushing Ron, you need to be friends with this man.
Right.
And it takes a long time. But Ron starts to learn a lot more too, because at first, going to the homeless shelter was just another chore, every Tuesday night that they'd go for a couple hours and then he was done, He was just Deborah's husband and he'd help out. But it became so much more than that. They were learning people's names. They wanted to know their stories. They were learning about these people's humanity. It wasn't just them doing a little charity work and going off. And everyone else at the homeless shelter started to trust them and realize, oh, these people aren't just here for the holidays just to feel good about themselves.
Yeah, it's not like a show to be oh, I work at the homeless center. I've gone a couple of times. It's more about actually seeing their human dignity.
Yes, it's completely pure, and their intentions are just completely pure.
Right.
So Ron starts to learn that as well. So when he finally breaks through with Denver, they get coffee together and they just learn about each other's lives. And Ron just has this whole breakthrough of understanding. So it's really just about reconciling their differences and understanding who each other are as people, and finding where they are the same in what aspects of that. And they both learn just to be faithful in so much more ways that they could ever imagine.
That's beautiful. How has that helped you in seeing your role as going into being an educator and wanting to do that with your life?
Yeah, it's just such a beautiful story that it made me think, of course this is my education class, so thinking about how to translate these messages of faith and charity and all that into being a teacher, it just made me think about why am I doing this? Because there's not a lot of money that's in it, but
yeah, it has to be for some other bigger purpose.
Right. It's such a reminder of being service-minded and willing the good of these children and wanting to make a difference in their lives. So it kind of, one of the things I described it as in one of our assignments was, it kind of reminds me of going to a retreat and coming back after a retreat and being filled with yes, let's go out, let's evangelize, let's, be just so good. And so after this I'm oh yes, I just want to make a difference. I want to love unconditionally and just be the hope for these children, like Deborah was for all the homeless people.
Yeah, and try to bring some connection in between, because the children come from all different places and might have the same differences as Ron and Denver, and this book will probably help in cultivating that friendship amongst them, or at least being you would take the role of Deborah as trying to help cultivate that.
Yeah,
or
I want to be
even
Deborah.
just
I want to be Deborah.
and also just like give them like a safe place like Deborah and Ron did, where like their dignity and they are seen if they're coming from a place where they don't get that. Like that's like a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, we talked a
that
lot
you can
about
do.
children's backgrounds and stuff, and so
Yeah.
that's a lot of this too, is like learning how people are human and like what makes them them.
Yeah.
And so like I want to make sure that like I try to get to know my students as people, so that I can, you know, just understand them more and more and get out of my little bubble of like
Right.
what I think. Like I'm kind of Ron in a situation where like I'm in my bubble of like what I know and what I feel is right, because
Right.
like that's my culture, like things that I think are normal. But we talked a lot about culture and
Mm-hmm.
just understanding differences, and I think this book is a real breakthrough with that for me, just
Yeah.
understanding that. But as I said, like it being like a retreat, I don't want this feeling to go away, you know.
Right.
I don't want it to fade.
Well, and I think like making that as like your life and your purpose is what you're doing as an educator will help it so that it's not that way.
Mm-hmm.
Because like every day then you are sacrificing of yourself, of your time, of like even like as much money as you could have made somewhere else to help these children.
Mm-hmm.
And even like, you know, you can help their families. Like a good teacher has such an impact, just like a simple, you know, housewife has such an impact on not only Denver but everyone in the like homeless
Right.
thing. So it can be really beautiful. But
Yeah. So I just want that joy, and I just want to know that I'm doing the right thing and like doing what God's
Right.
calling me to do. Because that's another thing, is like it's kind of scary, like leaping into this like faith of just like, okay, if this is what you want me to do, like I'm gonna keep going with it no matter how like many challenges and difficulties I face. Like I want to be like Deborah in that sense of just following, you know, fully, no matter what.
Anything that any of the characters said in the book that you were like, oh my goodness, this is like so meaningful to me, and like it struck you and like helped change your view, or just like gave more foundation for what you want to do with your life, or just, I don't know, impacted you in any way?
Yeah, there's so many things I can think of. After letting Debbie go, and Denver thinks, because that's what he always calls her. He always calls her Miss Debbie. And Denver talks to her as she has cancer and she's kind of laying on her deathbed. And what he says is, God has put it on my heart to tell you that if you lay down the torch, I'll pick it up and I'll keep your ministry to the homeless going.
That's beautiful.
So it's just so, it's like, wow. Like that's when you're like, Denver has completely changed. Completely is just like, here I am. I'm going to keep changing the lives of these people. I'm following, you know, what the work that you're leaving behind. Like you have done what you need to do. And like he just gives her peace, and that's what God tells him to do, you know, is like give her peace, let her go, because everyone's just praying so hard for Debbie, like, you know, God, don't let her go, all this, like she doesn't deserve it. Of course there's so much anger from Ron trying to understand why God would do this.
Yeah, and then Debbie's like, probably like, that's hard for her
It's
to
completely
hear that. And for Denver to be like, you know, like, if you're going, like, it'll be okay here, instead of, like, putting that stress of, like, no, we need you, like, we love you, we miss
need
you, which
you.
is wonderful, too. But that, like, strength to be like, okay, if this is your time, then it's your time.
It's like giving someone else peace of mind.
Yeah.
I feel like is
That
another
it's gonna
thing.
be okay while they, like, if they leave. But then at the same time, it shows how important and impactful she was to him.
She was so important. Like she completely changed, like his life, everyone's lives, and Ron's life. Like even though he already seemed well off, like he was changed so much for the better just because of their work together and all that. And so I just think that's an incredible breakthrough for Denver too. And we just, I mean, I was like near tears. I was just like, oh my gosh, like I don't want, like you just get so involved in
You
the
get
story.
so attached to them, because they're so human, and they show that. And
it's a
makes it,
true
like,
story
it's
too.
a
So
true
you're like
story.
trying to imagine like this in real life, like it playing out. So yeah, it just overall it's just a beautiful
It's
story.
really beautiful.
And yeah, those are the kind of things that we read about. So you should probably read this book now. We've
I'm
talked about
kind of
it.
tempted to. I kind of am.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful read, and yeah, I think we learned some incredible lessons, and
Yeah.
I hope to always remember, you know, what we discussed and what we talked about and understood, and what I learned from this novel as I go on to be a teacher someday. So.